So what's required of us now as we come to a knowledge that some of the things we do, perhaps we've always known some of these things help destroy people's lives, unconsciously or consciously. Surely we're called to courage, to be brave, not too humble. Parker Palmer described teaching as an occult art. It certainly is an occult art, teaching, but perhaps learning is an occult art. And perhaps it's time we engaged young people in taking some responsibility for their learning, taking responsibility for their passion, taking responsibility for their timelines, taking responsibility for their structure, taking responsibility for what they access. Not with soft options, not with the capacity to do nothing and nobody cares, but with the capacity to be responsible, with the responsibility to be responsible for doing nothing or doing a lot or doing a little bit, and then being called to account for that individually, as a, not in an individualistic way, but in a way which honours the sacredness of each person and the sacredness of the responsibility to use their talents. How long are we going to put up with timetabling and daily organisation which destroys and corrupts the actual learning events for people as we try to fill in holes and blocks of periods of learning with students, with people who don't know what they're doing, or people who have to be manipulated around to cover this area so that we just keep control in a group of 25. It's going to take a lot of courage to understand we need no groups of 25. It's going to take great courage to understand that you can run a whole school of 1,500 students or 2,000 students or 10,000 students without classes of 25 students and teachers rotating around or students rotating around in these fractured learning events. So if we split up the year into 60,000 learning minutes of instructional time or 80,000 minutes of instructional time, counting what young people, grade 5 and 6 students do at home, how can that be structured so that the students' learning is the primary issue, not the structure of the teaching arrangements of which then you force students into? The reality is you can run a school with no groups like that. It may be optimum at times to have a group of 25. I doubt it, but it may be. It's irrelevant. It's certainly the reality that most people learn as an individual, and there will need to be some relationship with another adult where you're encouraged to go to the next spot, the next part of the learning journey, the next concept, and you need an elder around you to nudge you to the next concept, to give you the courage to try the next concept, to be brave enough to say, well, I can get from there to there, but in between time I need to learn this skill or get myself organised around this issue or read this book or chase that thing on the internet or do whatever. So there's always going, the learning event's binary. There's no such thing as learning as a group. That doesn't exist. It's an arrangement for community, which is fine. It doesn't actually happen in groups. It happens for the individual alone, supported by, prompted with, etc. So it's just as relevant in many issues for didactic teaching, for instance, that don't have 25 there, have 300 there and have the best teacher present it. Present it on the technology, where the best teacher in Victoria in biology, if it's a lesson on cognitive aspects of some aspect of biology. Why on earth would you have 4,000 biology teachers around Victoria teaching a didactic session on biology? It's a waste of resources. It's a stupidity. These young people who come to school, many of them are completely anonymous. Many of the boys in particular are leading anonymous academic lives. Most often it's a non-existent academic life with no striving, with no structure. Students who've learned that they can't keep up. Students have learned it doesn't matter if you do keep up. Students who've learned I can keep up regardless of what the teacher says. The structure of it's irrelevant for all of those, whether you're coping or whether you're not coping. But in these structures, we have people who don't get through, don't become competent communicators, don't believe in their talents, don't believe they've got a position in society, don't believe they could ever aspire to be in a position of influence, don't believe that they could cope in a relationship with anyone for more than 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 2 years or 1 year, don't believe that they could caress and nurture and love young people into life as their own children, don't believe it's worthwhile being here, don't believe it's worthwhile participating in the community, don't believe in the values of society, don't believe in the values of civilisation, but are in fact diminished to actually turn around and believe that the only thing in life is something which pleases me, something which I crave for, something which is going to affect me. There are victims to the way communities are structured. It's not just schools, it's all organisations. So without beating ourselves up, without going into despair that somehow we've done this on purpose, perhaps if we just relax, believe in our own talents, believe that we can think through this thing, be honest enough to know what works and what doesn't work, be courageous enough to take on parent groups who'll say, oh, we can't do that because my child might be affected by it. Have courageous boards who will say that we will enrol students and we will try to provide the best learning environment for all, and we won't be controlled by people whose students are in the best 10% or 15% and have got vested interest in them being compared to all the others. The courage is there, the formation's there, the time's right, and the technology of the day, quite counterintuitively, could in fact be giving us the opportunity to not only talk about this stuff, but to actually do it. It's not about going back to the future. It's not about going back to a time when all this happened. It never happened. It never happened. So as we go along in civilisation, the educational institutions in it, the people who are driven to support young people in coming to fullness, coming to wholeness, believing in themselves, contributing to the world, etc. We need you to trust yourselves. We need to trust ourselves. We know that we can restructure our organisations so that they actually, deliberately, on purpose, consciously compare themselves to the notion, the holy grail of, do we treat every young person, really, not just in writing, not just prepared to accept that some are not going to make it. Who's not going to make it? Is it my child? Is it your child? Is it your grandchild? It can't be. They all have to make it. That's the aspiration. That's the holy grail. Are we going to succeed every time? No. But do we have to consciously make sure that we take out of the road things which diminish, suppress, rules which regress young people, putting young people as young as 6 into time-out rooms to navel gaze about their badness, and honestly expect a 6-year-old boy to enter into 20 minutes of self-flagellation, and that's going to suddenly stop him whacking the kid out in the playground the next time something happens. Give me a break. Our intellect's much more powerful than this. Our resources can be used much better than this. Instead of joining in the chorus of always saying we haven't got enough money to do this, we haven't got enough money to that, what about we look at where we're using the money now? Is it really legitimately sensible to have so many teachers taking groups of 25 students when Billy Blancs can work out that that's not the best way to organise the learning environments for young people during a full day session or a full week session or a full term session or a full year's session or 13 years. Do we honestly believe that that structure, that core structure, is worth hanging on to as the primary structure for 95% of 13 years of formal education? It's a madness. It's nonsense.